The old black man they mocked at the shooting range moved quietly, his hands trembling as he set up his station. Chase and his friends laughed louder with each shake, confident in their cruelty. "Bet Grandpa can't even see the target," they sneered, drawing a crowd eager for entertainment. No one noticed how Samuel Hawkins's eyes changed when he lifted his rifle, how the tremor suddenly vanished, replaced by a stillness that should have warned them. They couldn't recognize what stood before them, a ghost from classified missions, a phantom whose impossible shots had made him a legend in wars they'd only seen in movies. The first bullet hit dead center, the second followed, forming a single hole, and as silence fell across the range, the truth slowly dawned. They had just challenged the deadliest sniper in military history. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The small town of Pinewood wasn't known for much. A handful of churches, 2 grocery stores that had been locked in silent competition for decades, and Darren McKnight's shooting range, the only one within 50 miles. The range had just opened for the day when Samuel Hawkins pulled into the gravel parking lot. His weathered Chevy truck groaned to a stop, the engine settling into silence as his gnarled hands released the steering wheel. For a moment he just sat there, gathering himself. The morning sun reflected off the worn metal of a vintage rifle case resting on the passenger seat. Samuel ran his fingers over it, tracing the familiar edges. The case had seen more of the world than most people ever would. Another day, he whispered to himself, a ritual that had carried him through 78 years of life. Samuel stepped out of his truck, his movements deliberate and careful. Age had claimed much of his once powerful frame, leaving behind a man whose slight stoop and cautious gait suggested fragility. His dark skin was lined with the markings of time, a roadmap of years spent under harsh suns across continents most Americans couldn't pronounce. The weight of the rifle case pulled slightly at his right arm as he made his way toward the entrance. The tremor in his left hand was worse today. He flexed his fingers, willing them to steady. Inside, the range hummed with the familiar sounds of a place dedicated to precision and power. The metallic click of magazines being loaded, the soft murmur of conversations about barrel weights and wind calculations, and occasionally, the contained thunder of a shot being fired. Darren McKnight stood behind the counter, his broad shoulders and military posture unmistakable. In his late 50s, the former Marine still carried himself like he was waiting for inspection. His eyes, sharp and observant, tracked Samuel as he entered. "Morning," Darren nodded, neither particularly warm nor unwelcoming. Just fair, the way he treated everyone. "Morning," Samuel replied, his voice soft yet clear. "Lane for an hour, please." Darren was reaching for the sign-in sheet when the door behind Samuel swung open, letting in a blast of laughter followed by 3 men in their 20s. They carried expensive-looking rifle cases and wore matching caps from a tactical gear company. The smell of beer clung to them despite the early hour. "Yo, Darren, tell me you saved our usual spot." The tallest of the 3 called out, slapping a 20 on the counter. "Chase," Darren acknowledged with a hint of resignation. "Dylan Troy." He nodded to the others. "You know the rules. No shooting if you've been drinking." Chase Warren flashed a grin that never reached his eyes. "Relax, old man. That was last night. We're sharp as tacks today." His gaze landed on Samuel, who was quietly filling out the sign-in sheet. The tremor in Samuel's hand made his signature waver. "Well, look what we have here," Chase nudged Dylan. "Gramps decided to come play with the big boys." Dylan snickered, making no effort to lower his voice. "Think he can even see the target?" Samuel continued writing, his expression unchanged. "Careful." "Now," Troy joined in, his voice carrying a sharper edge. "You know what they say about these old types. Probably can't even hold that thing steady." The slur that followed was muttered just loud enough to hear. Darren's jaw tightened. "That's enough," he warned. But Chase was already moving to stand directly behind Samuel. "What you got in there, Grandpa? Civil War musket?" Chase leaned over Samuel's shoulder, invading his space. "Bet you can't hit the broadside of a barn with those shaky hands." Samuel finished signing, straightened up, and turned to face Chase. Their eyes met, and for just a moment, something flashed in Samuel's gaze, something ancient and dangerous, a glimpse of the man he'd once been. Then it was gone, replaced by the mild expression of an elderly man accustomed to being underestimated. "Excuse me, young man," Samuel said politely, stepping around Chase to receive his lane assignment from Darren. "Lane 4, Darren said, handing Samuel a pair of ear protection. "It's the quietest one today." "Thank you." Samuel nodded and moved toward his designated area. "Lane 4, Chase mimicked in a quavering voice. "Better make it the handicapped lane." The three young men erupted in laughter as they took their places in the adjacent lanes. Samuel methodically set up his station, laying out his rifle case, and carefully opening it. Inside lay a precision rifle that looked both vintage and meticulously maintained, the kind of weapon that spoke of expertise rather than hobbyist interest. Samuel's hands moved with practiced efficiency as he assembled it, each motion purposeful despite the occasional tremor. From behind the counter, a young woman emerged with a stack of fresh targets. Meera McKnight, Darren's daughter, had her father's observant eyes and direct manner, though her movements carried the deliberate care of someone who had treated battlefield wounds. "Need anything else, sir?" she asked Samuel, handing him a target. "This is fine, thank you," Samuel replied with a small smile. Across the way, Chase made an exaggerated motion of steadying his hands. "Oh, better watch out! Grandpa's locked!" And loaded. He might hit the ceiling. Samuel didn't acknowledge the mockery. He simply positioned his target, put on his ear protection, and took his stance. His breathing slowed, the tremor in his hands momentarily subsiding as muscle memory older than his tormentors took over. He squeezed the trigger once. The shot rang out, distinct from the rapid-fire approach the young men were taking in their lanes. When the target returned, a single perfect hole punctured the bullseye. Meera, who had been watching, raised an eyebrow. Samuel reloaded without comment, as if the shot had been unremarkable. "Lucky," Chase scoffed, noticing the result. "Bet he can't do it twice." Samuel fired again. Another perfect hit, less than a millimeter from the first. Troy lowered his rifle, frowning. Dylan whispered something to Chase, whose face darkened. "Hey, old-timer," Chase called out, his voice carrying a new edge. "What's your trick? You got some kind of special sight on that antique?" Samuel didn't respond, focusing on his next shot. Irritated by the lack of response, Chase deliberately bumped Samuel's shoulder as he walked past to retrieve a fresh target. "Oops. Sorry there. Unsteady ground," he smirked. Samuel's rifle shifted, but his expression remained neutral. "No harm done," he said quietly, repositioning himself. Meera stepped forward. "Sir, would you like to move to another lane?" Samuel shook his head. "This one is just fine." He fired a third shot, perfect again. By now, a few other patrons had noticed what was happening. An off-duty police officer named Wilson and a retired teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, both regulars at the range, exchanged glances. "That old man can shoot," Wilson murmured to Mrs. Abernathy. "Those boys picked the wrong person to mess with," she replied. After completing his session, Samuel carefully disassembled his rifle, wiping each part down with a soft cloth before returning it to its case. His movements were unhurried, precise. Like a ritual performed countless times, Chase and his friends continued their noisy shooting, occasionally glancing over with diminishing bravado. Their targets showed scattered patterns, nothing close to Samuel's precision. As Samuel prepared to leave, Meera approached him again. "That was impressive shooting, sir," she said, keeping her voice professional, yet warm. "Just keeping the rust off," Samuel replied with a modest nod. "Are you new to town?" "I don't think I've seen you at the range before. Moved here about 3 months ago. Wanted somewhere quiet for my retirement." Samuel closed his case, securing the latches. As he did, Meera caught a glimpse of something sewn into the interior lining, a military insignia she couldn't quite place, but recognized as Special Forces. "Well, you're welcome here any time," she said, her curiosity piqued. Samuel thanked her and headed for the exit, passing Darren at the counter. "Good shooting today," Darren acknowledged with a respectful nod. Samuel paused. "Nice range you have. Clean, well maintained. Try to keep it that way," Darren replied. Some folks make it harder than others. Their eyes both drifted toward Chase and his friends, still shooting and laughing. Youth, Samuel said simply, neither condemning nor excusing. After Samuel left, Chase sauntered up to the counter. What's his deal anyway? Acting all mysterious with that ancient rifle? Darren leveled a steady gaze at Chase. Word of advice, son. Some people wear their history on their bones. You'd do well not to judge a book by how worn its cover looks. Whatever, man, Chase scoffed. He got lucky with a few shots. Darren shook his head slightly. Your dad never taught you about respect, did he? Something ugly flashed across Chase's. First, my dad taught me plenty about knowing who deserves what. He turned away, rejoining his friends. Later that evening, after closing the range, Meera sat at her laptop in the small apartment she shared with her father above the range. The memory of the old man's shooting and the military insignia had stayed with her all day. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, Samuel Hawkins, veteran sniper. The search results loaded, and Meera's eyes widened. Page after page of classified documents, partially redacted after-action reports, and brief mentions in military journals appeared. Most were marked declassified with recent dates. One headline from a military history site caught her eye. The Phantom Marksman, the legend of Samuel Hawkins. This can't be him, she whispered, scrolling through an article detailing impossible shots taken during covert operations spanning 3 decades. She clicked on a blurry photograph from 1970, a group of Special Forces operators in Vietnam. In the background, slightly separated from the group, stood a tall, lean soldier with a sniper rifle slung across his back. The caption read, believed to be S. Hawkins, far right, though few photographs exist of the legendary marksman. Meera leaned closer to the screen, studying the distant figure in the photograph. Then she opened a new search. Darren McKnight, Sr., Vietnam. The connection she suspected began to take shape, pulling her into a history she'd never fully known. Chaos. Morning light filtered through Samuel's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. He moved methodically, preparing his morning coffee with the precision of a man who had made routine his anchor in a chaotic world. Knock at the door broke the silence. Samuel paused, head tilted slightly. Few people knew where he lived. Fewer still would visit unannounced. Old habits made him approach the door from an angle, staying clear of the direct line of fire through the window. Through the peephole, he saw Meera McKnight, holding 2 coffee cups from the local diner. He opened the door, surprise briefly crossing his weathered features. Miss McKnight, he said, his voice carrying a question. Mr. Hawkins, Meera replied, offering one of the cups. I thought you might appreciate some real coffee. The stuff at the range tastes like engine oil. Samuel studied her for a moment before accepting the cup. How did you find my address? Small town, she shrugged, but her eyes held something more. Knowledge. Questions. Mind if I come in? It's about my grandfather. Samuel's expression remained neutral, but he stepped aside, allowing her entry to his modest home. The living room was sparsely furnished, a comfortable chair, a small television rarely used, and bookshelves filled with history texts and military memoirs. Nothing personal adorned the walls, no family photos or mementos. It was the home of a man who had learned to travel light through life. Your shooting yesterday, Meera began, settling into the offered chair. I've only seen that kind of precision, from competition shooters or military snipers. Samuel took a seat across from her, his hands cradling the coffee cup. I served, he acknowledged simply. Vietnam? Desert Storm? Meera pressed gently, a slight nod. Among others. Special Forces. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been researching me. I'm a curious person, Meera admitted. And that insignia, in your rifle case, it's not exactly standard issue. Samuel took a slow sip of his coffee. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken history. My father doesn't talk much about my grandfather, Meera finally said. Darren McKnight, Sr. He died when my dad was just a teenager. All I know is he served in Vietnam, came home changed and passed away from what they called complications from service. Something shifted in Samuel's gaze, recognition, perhaps even pain. He was a good man, Samuel said quietly. Better than most. Meera leaned forward. So you did know him? Samuel stood, moving to a bookshelf where he retrieved a wooden box. It was simple but well crafted, with a small brass lock. From his pocket, he produced a key that looked as though it hadn't been used in years. Your father, Samuel said, unlocking the box, has his father's eyes. Same way of standing too. Weight on the balls of his feet, ready to move. The lid of the box creaked open, revealing a collection of items carefully preserved. Medals nestled. In velvet, folded papers with official seals, photographs in protective sleeves. Samuel selected one photo and handed it to Meera. It showed a much younger Samuel, his posture military straight, pinning a medal on another soldier. The other man's face was partially turned away from the camera, but the resemblance to Darren was unmistakable. Silver Star, Samuel explained. For valor under fire. He pulled 3 men to safety while taking heavy enemy fire. Should have been a Medal of Honor, but politics got in the way. Meera's fingers trembled slightly as she traced the outline of her grandfather's profile. He saved my life 3 times, Samuel continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone revisiting a well-worn memory. First time was near Pleiku. Second time near the Cambodian border. Third time, he paused. Well, the third time isn't. In any official record, he rifled through the box, pulling out another photograph. This one showed a group of men, faces smudged with camouflage paint, weapons held with the comfortable familiarity of extensions of their bodies. Samuel stood slightly apart, a long-range rifle in his hands. Recon unit, deep in hostile territory, he explained. Your grandfather was our radio operator, I was Overwatch. Sniper, Meera translated. Samuel nodded. We called it playing guardian angel back then. His eyes took on a distant look, seeing something far beyond the walls of his small home. It was monsoon season, he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Visibility near 0. We'd been tracking NVA movements for 3 days without sleep. The unit was moving through a valley when the ambush came. Samuel's hands, usually unsteady with age, became perfectly still as he spoke, as if the memory itself steadied him. I was positioned on a ridge about 800 yards out. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see through my scope. Your grandfather's voice came through the radio, calm as could be. Hawk, we need your eyes. Then all hell broke loose. Meera listened, transfixed, as Samuel described impossible shots taken through sheets of rain, guided more by instinct than sight. The way he had systematically eliminated the ambush, one precise shot at a time, while the unit below scrambled for cover. The last enemy soldier had your grandfather in his sights, Samuel continued. I took the shot through a gap in the trees, no wider than a dinner plate, 850 yards in a monsoon with a crosswind, the kind of shot you don't even attempt. But you made it, Meera said softly. Had to, Samuel replied simply. He'd have done the same for me. Meera's gaze dropped to the photo again. And the third time, when he saved you? Samuel carefully replaced the medals and photos in the box, all except for one document that he handed to Meera. It was a psychiatric evaluation, dated 1973, with much of the text redacted. After Vietnam, I came home. Different, Samuel said, choosing his words with care. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done, they follow you. Your grandfather found me one night, sitting in my car with my service pistol. He knew what I was considering. He tapped the document. Got me into a program for veterans instead of letting me become another statistic. Stayed with me for 3 days straight, talking about everything and nothing. Made me promise to call him if the darkness ever came back. Meera blinked back unexpected tears. I never knew. Not many did, Samuel said. Your grandfather wasn't one to broadcast his good deeds. A silence fell between them, comfortable in its shared understanding. I see some of him in you, Samuel finally said. That steady gaze. The way you stand. Military medical, correct? Meera nodded. Army medic. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Then trauma. Nurse at Walter Reed. Saving lives runs in your blood then. Meera's expression clouded. Not always successfully. Samuel studied her, recognition in his eyes. You lost someone. Someone you couldn't save. A 19-year-old private, Meera confirmed, her voice tight. IED took both his legs. I had my hands inside him for 4 hours, trying to stop the bleeding. He looked at me the whole time, never took his eyes off mine, like if he just kept looking at me, he'd be okay. She swallowed hard. He died on my table. And you've been carrying him ever since, Samuel said. Not a question, but a statement of understanding. How do you put it down? Meera asked, her professional composure cracking. That weight? Samuel's weathered hand reached out, covering hers briefly. You'll lose soldiers. It's the nature of war. But you saved more than you know. Before Meera could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her father, asking where she was. I should go, she said, rising. Dad will start to worry. Samuel walked her to the door. As she stepped onto the porch, Meera turned back. Thank you, she said, her voice cracking slightly. For what you did for my grandfather. For all of them. Samuel shook his head. He saved mine too, he repeated softly, closing the door. Later, that afternoon, Meera found her father in the back office of the range, going through inventory lists. Dad, she began, uncertain how to broach the subject. What do you remember about Grandpa's time in Vietnam? Darren looked up, surprise evident on his face. Not much. He didn't talk about it. Why? I met someone who served with him. Meera perched on the edge of the desk. Samuel Hawkins. The old man from yesterday? Darren's brow furrowed. What's he got to do with Dad? Meera pulled out her phone, showing him the research she'd compiled. He's not just any veteran, Dad. According to declassified files, he was one of the most accomplished snipers in military history. They called him the Phantom Marksman. Darren's expression shifted from skepticism to shock as he scrolled through the information. This can't be right. These shot distances, these conditions. And he served with Grandpa, Meera pressed. He showed me photos, told me stories. Darren sat back heavily in his chair. Dad did mention someone once, a sniper who watched over their unit like some kind of guardian angel. Called him Hawk. Said the man could shoot through time itself if he had to. His voice grew quiet. I always thought it was just stories. It wasn't, Meera said. Samuel saved Grandpa's life multiple times. And apparently, Grandpa saved his too, after they came home. Darren was silent for a long moment, processing this new connection to his father's past. Finally, he stood up. Where does he live? He asked. I want to thank him. The next day, Samuel returned to the range, this time accompanied by Darren. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Darren introduced Samuel to the staff with obvious respect, explaining his connection to the McKnight family. This man served with my father, Darren told Wilson, the off-duty officer. Saved his life more than once. Samuel accepted the recognition with quiet dignity, though he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He set up at his lane, the same methodical routine as before. Chase and his friends arrived shortly after, their swagger intact despite the previous day's humiliation. Look who's back, Chase muttered, eyeing Samuel. Guess he wants another round of luck. Darren intercepted them before they could approach Samuel. Behave yourselves today, he warned, his tone leaving no room for argument. From across the range, a new arrival caught everyone's attention. A woman in her mid-30s with a camera bag slung over one shoulder surveyed the space with sharp, analytical eyes. Can I help you? Meera asked, approaching her. I hope so, the woman replied, offering her hand. Renee Jackson, investigative journalist. I'm researching a book on unrecognized military heroes. Her gaze drifted to Samuel, who was carefully loading his rifle. And I think I just found my next chapter. Chase, watching this exchange, saw an opportunity. He approached Samuel with an exaggerated show of respect that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey there, sir," he said loudly, ensuring the journalist could hear. "How about a friendly competition? Just a simple 5-shot drill for accuracy and speed. Show these folks what real shooting looks like?" Samuel glanced up, studying Chase for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he nodded. 5 shots, he agreed quietly. "Your terms." A small crowd began to gather as word of the challenge spread through the range. Renee positioned herself for a better view, her interest clearly piqued. As Darren set up the competition targets, Meera moved to Samuel's side. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. Samuel checked his rifle's scope with practiced precision. "Some lessons can only be taught through demonstration," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of something Meera hadn't heard before. Not anger, but firm resolve. The stage was set for what would become a pivotal moment, not just for Samuel, but for everyone watching. The shooting range fell silent as Chase stepped up to the firing line. His confident smirk betrayed no doubt as he loaded his expensive tactical rifle, the kind that promised to make even an amateur look competent. 5 shots in 10 seconds, Darren announced, standing as the official judge. "Highest score wins." Chase winked at his friends, Dylan and Troy, who stood nearby with their arms crossed. "Watch and learn, old-timer," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Samuel stood quietly to the side, his weathered rifle held loosely in hands that now, strangely, showed no sign of trembling. Renee Jackson, the investigative journalist, positioned herself for a better view, her keen eyes missing nothing. A small crowd had gathered, regular patrons, a few off-duty police officers, and Meera, whose concerned gaze shifted between Samuel and Chase. "Timer starts on my mark," Darren said, lifting his hand. 3, 2, 1, mark. Chase fired rapidly, his body rocking slightly with each shot. The electronic timer beeped at 7.1 seconds. When the target was retrieved, it showed a respectable grouping, all 5 shots within the inner rings, though none perfectly centered. "Not bad," Chase crowed, turning to the crowd. 7 seconds flat, all on target. He gave Samuel a challenging, "Look, your turn, Grandpa. Try not to throw your shoulder out." Samuel stepped forward with an unhurried grace that spoke of decades of discipline. He settled into position, adjusting his stance slightly as if finding his center. The way he held the rifle, like it was an extension of his body rather than a tool, made several of the veterans in the crowd exchange knowing glances. Darren raised his hand again. "Ready, Mr. Hawkins?" Samuel gave a barely perceptible nod. 3, 2, 1, mark. 5 shots rang out in such rapid succession they seemed almost a single sound, yet each was distinct, controlled. The timer beeped at 5.2 seconds. When the target returned, a hushed whisper rippled through the crowd. 5 perfect bullseyes so tightly grouped, they formed what looked like a single hole with ragged edges. 5.2 seconds, Darren announced, unable to keep the awe from his voice. Perfect score. The silence that followed was profound. Even those who had seen Samuel shoot before hadn't expected this level of mastery. Chase's face flushed dark red. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Samuel simply began to pack up his rifle, as methodical in victory as he had been in preparation. Renee stepped forward, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "Mr. Hawkins," she said, extending her hand. "Renee Jackson. I'm researching a book on unrecognized military heroes. I'd love to talk with you about your service." Samuel regarded her with cautious eyes. "Not much to tell," he said quietly. "Think we both know that's not true," Renee replied, lowering her voice. "The phantom marksman deserves his chapter in history." Before Samuel could respond, Chase pushed between them, his humiliation transforming into something uglier. "This whole thing is rigged," he spat, looking around for support. "Old man probably had his lane set up special. No way he shoots like that with those shaky hands." Troy and Dylan moved to flank their friend, their postures hostile. "That's enough," Darren warned, stepping forward. "You lost fair and square. Show some respect." "Respect?" Chase laughed, the sound sharp with anger. "For what? Some ancient black guy who probably never shot anything more dangerous than tin cans off a fence?" The slur that followed hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did, a brief flicker of weariness rather than anger, as if he'd heard such words too many times to count. Meera moved quickly to intervene, her body language shifting to the alert readiness of a combat medic. "That's it. You're done here for today." "You can't throw us out," Dylan protested. "Watch me," Darren said, his voice deadly calm. "My range, my rules. Get out. Now." For a tense moment, it seemed Chase might escalate further. Then he spat on the ground near Samuel's feet. "Whatever. Enjoy your little victory, old man. Some things don't change no matter how good you shoot," he glared at Darren. "You're picking the wrong side here, McKnight." As the three men stalked out, Samuel calmly wiped down his rifle, seemingly unperturbed by the confrontation. "I'm sorry about that," Darren said, approaching him. "Some people never learn basic human decency." "Not your fault," Samuel replied. Simply. Renee had been watching the entire exchange with sharp interest. "Does that happen often around here?" she asked, her journalist's instinct for a story clearly engaged. "More than it should," Meera answered, her expression tight with controlled anger. "But usually not so openly." Later that evening, Samuel returned to his truck in the parking lot to find the word "nigger" spray-painted across the driver's side door in jagged red letters. A crude target had been drawn over the O in his license plate. He stood there for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he simply got in and drove home, the hateful message visible to everyone he passed. Meera discovered the vandalism. The next morning when she arrived early to open the range, she immediately called Samuel, who answered on the third ring. "Mr. Hawkins, your truck. Did you see what they did?" "I saw," he replied evenly. "We need to report this. The sheriff's department—" "It's just paint," Samuel interrupted gently. "I've already called a detailer to take care of it." Meera's frustration boiled over. "This isn't just about paint. It's a hate crime. Those boys need to be held accountable." "For what purpose?" Samuel asked, his voice calm. "So they can be even angrier? So they can escalate further?" "Because it's wrong," Meera exclaimed. "Why are you letting them get away with it?" There was a pause on the line. When Samuel spoke again, his voice carried a weight of experience that transcended the immediate situation. "Because that's not the war I fight, Meera. Some battles just feed the darkness. I've learned to choose mine carefully." The wisdom in his words didn't diminish Meera's anger, but it gave her pause. "At least let me help clean it up." "Already taken care of," Samuel assured her. "I'll see you at the range tomorrow." After hanging up, Samuel sat quietly in his living room, his mind drifting back to another time when choices had weighed heavily on his conscience. The memory came with visceral clarity. The scorching heat of the Iraqi desert, the weight of his rifle against his shoulder, and the image in his scope that had haunted him for years after. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, his small frame nearly buckling under the weight of the explosive vest strapped to his chest. Through his scope, Samuel could see the fear in the child's eyes, the reluctance in each step as he approached the American convoy stopped at a checkpoint. Samuel's spotter had confirmed the order twice. Confirmed hostile, green light. The shot had been clean, instant, a mercy if such a thing existed in war. The boy had fallen without ever knowing what hit him. The vest had detonated harmlessly away from the troops. That night, Samuel had scrubbed his hands until they bled, trying to wash away a stain that lived not on his skin but in his soul. It was his last mission. He had filed his retirement papers the following day. Now sitting in his quiet living room 20 years later, Samuel touched the small cross he wore under his shirt, not out of religious devotion, but as a reminder of all the lives that had passed through his crosshairs, of the weight he carried. The next day, Renee Jackson sat in the local diner, laptop open, pursuing every lead she could find on Samuel Hawkins. Her publisher had initially been enthusiastic about the Phantom Marksman chapter for her book, but as she dug deeper, revealing connections to classified operations across 3 decades, his tone had changed. "This is too hot," her editor had warned during their morning call. "We're talking about Black Ops, potential CIA involvement. Find a safer story, Renee. Since when do we back away from the truth? She had countered. Since we don't want to get sued into oblivion. Or worse. Renee had hung up, frustrated but undeterred. As she scrolled through heavily redacted mission reports, a new email appeared in her inbox. The sender was anonymous, but the subject line caught her attention. Hawk's Nest, Chase Warren. Inside was a single link to a private social media group. Using her investigative credentials, Renee managed to access the page, revealing a local militia group with disturbing white supremacist leanings. Chase Warren was listed as a junior member. His father, Sheriff Frank Maynard, was tagged in several posts. Renee's journalistic instincts sharpened. The connection between a local sheriff and a hate group was troubling enough. But when she searched for Maynard's military background, another piece fell into place. He had served in the same region as Samuel during Operation Desert Storm. This isn't about a shooting competition at all, she murmured to herself, ordering another coffee. This story was growing deeper roots by the hour. Meanwhile, at the range, Darren faced his own confrontation. Chase and his friends had returned, demanding to be allowed back in. It's a public business, Chase argued. You can't discriminate against us. Actually, I can, Darren replied. Private property. And after the stunt you pulled with Mr. Hawkins's truck, you're permanently banned. Chase's face contorted with rage. You're picking an old black vet over your own people? My father won't be happy about this. Your father should have taught you. Better, Darren said evenly. Now get out before I call someone to remove you. Chase leaned in, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You're making enemies you can't afford, McKnight. This isn't over. After they left, Meera found her father in the back office, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his desk. You okay, Dad? Darren released a slow breath. I've never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. Meera placed a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing. I know, but something tells me this is just the beginning. Later that week, Samuel was invited to speak at a local veterans event. He had initially declined, preferring to stay out of the spotlight, but Meera's gentle persistence had finally worn him down. The community center was packed, mostly with other veterans and their families. Samuel sat quietly on the stage, dressed in a simple suit that hung slightly loose on his frame, a single service pin on his lapel. When introduced, he walked to the podium with the measured pace of a man who had learned that rushing led to mistakes. The microphone squealed briefly as he adjusted it. I'm not one for speeches, he began, his voice soft but clear. Never have been. In my line of work, silence was usually the better part of valor. A few knowing chuckles rippled through the audience. They asked me to talk about heroism today. I'm not sure I'm qualified. I just did a job that needed doing. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But I've been thinking a lot about what we carry, home from war. The room grew still, veteran faces nodding in silent understanding. We all come back with invisible luggage, Samuel continued. Some call it PTSD, some call it the weight of memory. Whatever name you give it, it's heavy, and it's private. But that doesn't mean we have to carry it alone. His gaze found Meera. In the audience, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The real battle starts when you come home, when you have to remember how to live in a world that doesn't understand what you've seen, what you've done. That's the war that never really ends. Samuel's hands rested lightly on the podium, steady now, as if the very act of speaking these truths had temporarily lifted the tremor that usually plagued him. I've been carrying my war for over 50 years now. Some days it's lighter than others. But I've learned this much. Our scars, visible and invisible, don't define us. They just prove we were stronger than whatever tried to hurt us. When he finished speaking, the silence held for a heartbeat before the room erupted in applause. Many of the veterans had tears in their eyes, a brotherhood of understanding that transcended words. As the event wound down, Renee approached Samuel. That was powerful, she said. Would you reconsider an interview for my book? Before Samuel could answer, Meera rushed over, her face tight with concern. Dad just called. Someone tampered with my car. The brake line was cut. She looked directly at Samuel. This isn't random anymore. Late that night, as Meera and Darren discussed increasing security at the range, Renee received an anonymous threat ordering her to drop her investigation. And somewhere in the darkness, Samuel Hawkins made a decision that would change everything. The morning dawned gray and threatening, heavy clouds hanging low over the landscape as Meera arrived at Samuel's house. Her knocking went unanswered. The key. Windows were dark, the truck gone from the driveway. "Mr. Hawkins?" she called, peering through the windows. "Samuel?" The house stood empty, with no sign of struggle but also no indication of where he might have gone. On the kitchen table, visible through the window, lay a single folded note. After calling her father and getting no answer, Meera tried the door and found it unlocked, unusual for a man as security-conscious as Samuel. Inside, the house felt different. Emptier somehow, as if its owner had taken something essential when he left. The note on the table was addressed to her in neat, precise handwriting. "Meera, some battles choose us. I've gone to see an old friend. Tell Renee to be careful where she digs. Some graves aren't meant to be disturbed. S.H." Beneath his initials was an address in the mountains, about 60 miles north, and a name, Calvin Reeves. Meanwhile, deep in the Blue Ridge foothills, Samuel's truck crawled up a narrow dirt road that switchbacked through dense forest. The isolated cabin that emerged in a small clearing looked like it had grown from the mountainside itself, weathered wood blending with the surrounding pines. Before Samuel could even step from his vehicle, the cabin door opened. A tall black man in his 70s stood in the doorway, his unseeing eyes hidden behind dark glasses, his posture still military straight despite his age. "Took you long enough," Calvin Reeves called out, his voice strong and clear. "I've had coffee waiting for an hour." Samuel smiled for the first time in days. "Your hearing's still sharp as ever, Cal." "When you go blind, the other senses compensate," Calvin replied, tapping his ear. "That old truck of yours sounds like a dying elephant. Heard you coming from 3 miles out." The two men embraced briefly, the kind of contact reserved for those who had seen both heaven and hell together, and survived to speak of it. Inside, the cabin was spartanly furnished but meticulously organized, the home of a man who had adapted to blindness through perfect order. Weapons hung on the walls alongside photographs Calvin could no longer see but kept for the memories they held. "So," Calvin said, pouring coffee with practiced precision, "you've stirred up trouble again." Samuel accepted the mug. "Not intentionally. Never is with you." Calvin settled into a worn armchair. "Tell me." As Samuel recounted the events of the past weeks, Calvin listened without interruption, his expression shifting subtly at certain details. "Sheriff's name is Maynard?" he finally asked. "Frank Maynard?" Samuel nodded, then caught himself. "Yes, you know him?" Calvin's face hardened. "Not personally, but I remember the name from the Iraq incident." A heavy silence fell between them, laden with shared history. "You think it's connected?" Samuel asked. "Hell of a coincidence if it's not." Calvin leaned forward. "What's your play here, Hawk?" Samuel stared into his coffee. "I don't know yet. But these boys, they're targeting Meera, Darren, that journalist. It's not just about me anymore." "So you came here to, what, hide out?" "I came here to prepare," Samuel corrected quietly. Calvin's laugh was short and sharp. "The great Samuel Hawkins coming out of retirement for one last mission? Man, we're too old for that cowboy shit." "Not a mission," Samuel said. "Insurance." Before Calvin could respond, the sound of an approaching vehicle reached them. Calvin tilted his head, listening intently. "Smaller engine than yours. Japanese make, probably. Coming fast." Samuel moved to the window. "It's Meera." Meera's car skidded to a stop beside Samuel's truck, and she emerged looking both relieved and furious. "You disappear without a word?" she demanded as Samuel opened the door. "After what happened to my car?" "I left a note," Samuel replied calmly. "A cryptic note. I thought—" She stopped, emotion threatening to overtake her. "I thought something had happened to you." Calvin appeared behind Samuel. "The lady's got a point, Hawk. Dramatic exits were never your strong suit." "Hawk?" Meera echoed, looking between them. "Is that what they called you?" Among other things, Calvin replied with a grin. Calvin Reeves, former Sergeant Special Forces. I was this stubborn man's spotter for 15 years. As Meera joined them inside, the dynamic shifted to something easier. Calvin's presence bringing out a side of Samuel she hadn't seen before. More relaxed, occasionally even humorous in a dry, understated way. Over lunch, Calvin told stories of their missions, carefully edited for security but vivid in detail. This man, Calvin said, gesturing toward Samuel, once made a shot during a sandstorm that the ballistics experts later said was mathematically impossible. 2 miles out, 50-mile-per-hour crosswinds, hit the target dead center. Samuel shook his head. It was 1 mile, and the wind was gusty, not steady. Made it easier. Modest as always, Calvin snorted. Tell her about Tehran. That's still classified, Samuel muttered. Meera studied the two men, seeing the deep bond forged in danger and absolute trust. How did you become a spotter? She asked Calvin. I had the eyes for it, he replied. 2010 vision back then. Could spot a mosquito on an elephant's ass, at 1,000 yards. His smile faded slightly. Ironic that I ended up blind, isn't it? Ambush in Fallujah, Samuel explained quietly. Flash grenade at close range, burned his retinas. Best thing that ever happened to me, Calvin countered. Got me out before I ended up making one mistake too many. Got me my disability check, my cabin, and my peace and quiet. He turned toward Samuel with unerring accuracy. Something this fool has never learned to accept. As afternoon faded toward evening, the conversation turned more serious. Meera described the vandalism, the cut, break line, the escalating threats. This isn't just harassment anymore, she concluded. They're dangerous. They always were, Samuel said. The hate just makes it visible now. Calvin had grown increasingly pensive. There's something you're not seeing, Hawk. The timing, the personal nature of it. This isn't just about some racist punks at a shooting range. Samuel nodded slowly. I've been thinking the same thing. Meera looked between them. What do you mean? Samuel exchanged a meaningful glance with Calvin before responding. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, my unit was sent on a classified extraction. High-value target behind enemy lines. It went bad, Calvin continued. Real bad. Someone sold us out. We lost 3 good men, Samuel said, his voice tight with old anger. The official report blamed faulty intelligence, but we knew better. Someone in our own chain of command had deliberately sent us into a trap. Calvin leaned forward. We had evidence, radio transmissions, contradictory orders, timing that couldn't be coincidental. But when we tried to push for an investigation, they buried it, Samuel finished, along with our dead. The officers involved were quietly reassigned. One of them was a lieutenant named Franklin Maynard. Meera's eyes widened. Chase's father? The sheriff? Samuel nodded grimly. And now, 30 years later, he's here, in the same small town I chose for retirement. That can't be coincidence, Meera whispered. No, Samuel agreed. It can't. Night had fallen by the time Meera reluctantly prepared to leave. What are you going to do? She asked Samuel at the door. He looked out into the darkness, his expression unreadable. Tell her I had to go be a soldier one last time, he said to Calvin, who nodded in understanding. Samuel, Meera began, but he cut her off with a gentle hand on her shoulder. Go home. Look after your father. Be careful. His eyes held hers, with sudden intensity. Trust no one outside your immediate circle, especially not the sheriff's department. As her headlights disappeared down the mountain road, Calvin moved to stand beside Samuel on the porch. You know they'll come for you. Eventually, he said. I'm counting on it, Samuel replied. Better me than her. Inside, Samuel opened the large duffel bag he'd brought, revealing not weapons as might be expected, but specialized training equipment. Weights, targeting systems, and conditioning tools. What exactly are you planning? Calvin asked, sensing his friend's movements. Samuel began assembling a complex targeting mechanism with practiced hands. Not war, just enough readiness to keep them safe. And if readiness isn't enough? Samuel paused, the weight of decades of violence and restraint evident in his silence. Then God help them, he finally said, because I won't hold back a second time. While Samuel began his conditioning, Renee Jackson was conducting her own investigation. In a dimly lit hotel room surrounded by documents, she uncovered a connection that chilled her. Sheriff Maynard's military file contained a disciplinary note referencing the same operation Samuel had been part of, though all details were heavily redacted. More disturbing still, she found recent communications between Maynard and a private military contractor with ties to extremist groups. The timing coincided perfectly with Samuel's arrival in town. "This isn't random harassment," she murmured, arranging the evidence. "This is a coordinated campaign to silence him before he can expose something." Her phone rang, her editor again, more insistent this time. "Drop the story, Renee. We've received threats, serious ones. That just tells me I'm onto something important," she countered. "It's not worth your life," he argued. Renee glanced at the photo of Samuel receiving a classified commendation, his face young, but his eyes already old. "Some stories are," she replied, and hung up. Back at the range, Darren discovered that his security system had been disabled overnight. Nothing was stolen, but he found a single shell casing placed precisely in the center of his desk, a .308 caliber, the same type used by military snipers. The message was clear: "We can get to you anytime." Instead of intimidating him, the threat only strengthened his resolve. He called in favors from former Marine buddies, quietly arranging additional security. Unaware of these developments, Chase and his friends were making plans of their own. In the back room of a local bar, they huddled around a table with two older men with military bearing. "Dad says it's time to shut this down for good," Chase told them, his voice tight with anticipation. "The old man knows too much. And now he's got that journalist digging around." One of the men, a hard-faced former soldier with a prosthetic hand, nodded grimly. "We'll handle the journalist. You focus on getting the girl." "Meera?" Chase asked, surprised. "What's she got to do with this?" "Leverage," the man replied simply. "Everyone has a weakness, even legends." As dawn broke over the mountains the next day, Samuel stood at the edge of Calvin's property, rifle in hand. Despite his age, his posture was perfect, his breathing controlled. He sighted on a series of small targets Calvin had helped him set up at varying distances, from 300 to 1,000 yards. One by one, he hit each target dead center, the shots echoing through the valley like thunder from another time. Calvin sat on the porch, listening to each report with expert ears. "You're breathing still off on the long shots," he called out. "You're rushing the exhale." Samuel adjusted, taking the next shot at the farthest target. The sound that came back was the clean ping of a perfect hit. "Better," Calvin acknowledged. "But you're still favoring your right side. Age or injury?" "Both," Samuel admitted, lowering the rifle. "Shrapnel from Kandahar never fully healed." Calvin nodded thoughtfully. "You can't outshoot time, Hawk, you know that." "I don't need to," Samuel replied, reloading methodically. "I just need to stay sharp enough." "For what's coming?" Samuel gazed out at the distant targets, his expression hardening with resolve. "For what's already here." Miles away, Meera received an urgent text message that appeared to be from Samuel. "Meet me at the range tonight, 9 p.m. Come alone. Critical information." She read it twice, a sense of unease growing within her. Something about the wording felt wrong. Samuel had never texted her before, preferring calls or in-person conversations. Suspicious, she called the number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried Samuel's actual number next. No answer there either. Following her instincts, she called Renee. "Did you get a message from Samuel today?" "No," Renee replied, her voice instantly alert. "Why?" Meera explained the text, her concern evident. "Don't go," Renee said immediately. "It's not from him. It's a trap." As darkness fell, multiple vehicles converged on the isolated shooting range. Meera's car, driven cautiously with her father. Beside her, Renee's rental, approaching from the opposite direction, and two unmarked SUVs carrying Chase, his friends, and their older military companions. Watching it all from a hilltop half a mile away, Samuel Hawkins adjusted his thermal scope, his weathered face illuminated by the faint green glow. Beside him lay the tools of a trade he had hoped never to practice again. "I see you," he whispered, tracking the movement below with the calm detachment of a man who had once been death's quiet ambassador. "And this time, you won't even hear me coming." The shooting range stood silent under the moonlight, its metal frames and target stands casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Meera stepped carefully through the unlocked front gate, her phone's flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. "Samuel?" she called out, her voice echoing against the empty stalls. "Are you here?" Despite Renee's warning, she had come, not out of naivety, but prepared. Her father waited in a hidden position outside with a hunting rifle, while Renee was parked down the road, ready to call for backup. Meera moved toward the main building, every sense heightened. The familiar space felt alien in the darkness, transformed into something threatening. When the power suddenly cut out, plunging her phone's flashlight into the only remaining light source, her suspicions were confirmed. "I know this is a trap," she called out steadily. "Whoever's here, you should know, I'm not alone." Laughter echoed from the shadows near the equipment room. Three figures emerged, wearing tactical gear and face coverings, but Meera immediately recognized Chase's distinctive swagger. "Smart girl," Chase said, pulling down his mask with a smirk. "But not smart enough." He gestured vaguely toward the perimeter. "Your dad's already been taken care of." Meera's heart dropped, but she kept her expression neutral, years of combat zone experience helping her maintain composure. "What do you want, Chase?" "Originally, just to teach that old man a lesson about respect." Chase stepped closer, his face twisted with malice. "But now we're cleaning up loose ends." Dylan and Troy flanked him, their stances betraying military training that seemed at odds with their youth. Meera realized they weren't just rich kids playing soldier, they had actual training. "This isn't about the shooting competition," Meera said, playing for time while scanning for escape routes. "What did Samuel do to you? Or was it to your father?" Chase's smile faltered. "You don't know anything." "I know more than you think," Meera countered. "About Iraq, about the betrayal, about what your father did." Chase raised his pistol, aiming it directly at her. "You shouldn't have picked his side," he snarled. Meera tensed, preparing to dive for cover, when a sharp crack split the air. Chase's gun shattered in his hand, fragments of metal scattering across the concrete as he screamed in pain and surprise. A voice echoed through the range's PA system, calm and measured. "Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. This is your only warning." Dylan panicked, bolting toward the side fence. Another shot rang out, destroying the padlock and chain that would have allowed his escape. Troy reached for his phone, only to have it shot out of his hand with surgical precision. "What the hell?" Chase gasped, clutching his bleeding hand. "Who's out there?" A series of smoke grenades detonated around the perimeter, filling the range with swirling gray fog. Through this artificial mist, a figure appeared. Samuel Hawkins, moving with a fluid grace that belied his age, rifle slung across his back. "Didn't your fathers teach you better?" His voice carried a quiet authority that seemed to physically push the younger men back. "You're supposed to be up north," Chase spat. "We tracked your phone." "You tracked a phone," Samuel corrected mildly. "An amateur mistake." Troy lunged at Samuel, pulling a combat knife from his belt. Samuel sidestepped with economic precision, redirecting Troy's momentum to send him sprawling. When Dylan attacked from behind, Samuel countered without even turning fully around, using the younger man's weight against him in a textbook joint lock that left Dylan gasping on the ground. Chase, recovered from the initial shock, pulled a backup pistol from an ankle holster. Before he could aim, Samuel closed the distance between them with startling speed. His movements were nothing like those of the frail old man who had first entered the shooting range. They were measured, efficient, the product of decades of close-quarters combat training. The disarm happened so quickly it was almost imperceptible. One moment Chase had the gun, the next he was on his knees, arm twisted at an unnatural angle, Samuel standing calmly above him. 20 pounds of pressure more, and your shoulder separates, Samuel informed him conversationally. Another 10. After that, the joint breaks completely. Your choice. Meanwhile, Meera had worked her way free of the zip ties that had been hastily applied during the initial confrontation. She retrieved Chase's dropped weapon and moved to Samuel's side, keeping Troy and Dylan covered. Took you long enough, she said, a slight smile breaking through her tension. Had to let them make their last mistake, Samuel replied. Headlights swept across the range as multiple vehicles pulled in, Darren's truck and several sheriff's department cruisers. Sheriff Frank Maynard emerged from the lead vehicle, his face flushed with anger. What the hell is going on here? He demanded. Hand on his holstered sidearm. Attempted assault, possibly attempted murder, Samuel replied calmly. Your son and his friends lured Ms. McKnight here under false pretenses. That's a lie, Chase shouted. He attacked us. We were just meeting Meera to talk about range memberships. Maynard stepped forward, using his considerable physical presence, in an attempt to intimidate. You better have proof of these accusations, Hawkins, or I'll have you in a cell tonight. Oh, he has proof, came Renee's voice as she stepped out from behind a support column, professional camera in hand. I've been recording since they arrived, and... She pointed to the corners of the building where small cameras were mounted, their red lights blinking. So has every security camera in this place. Maynard's face went ashen. You set this up. No, Samuel corrected. We just made sure the truth would be seen this time. His gaze hardened. Unlike in Iraq, the sheriff flinched at the reference, then quickly recovered his composure. Deputies, arrest Mr. Hawkins for assault and trespassing. None of the deputies moved. One of them, a younger officer named Patterson, stepped forward instead. Sir, we've all seen the footage coming through to dispatch. It's clear who the aggressors were. Maynard's hand tightened on his weapon. That's an order, deputy. With respect, sir, Patterson replied. I think we should follow proper procedure here. Multiple witnesses, video evidence. This needs to go by the book. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Darren emerged from the shadows, rifle trained on Chase and his friends. Everyone's walking out of here alive tonight, he stated flatly. But those boys are leaving in handcuffs, not Samuel. Outnumbered and exposed, Maynard finally relented. He watched in silent fury as his son and the others were read their rights and placed in patrol cars. This isn't over, Hawkins, he said quietly as the last cruiser pulled away. Not by a long shot. Samuel nodded almost imperceptibly. I know. Later that night, as Meera treated a cut on Samuel's hand from the confrontation, she studied his face in the harsh fluorescent light of the range office. You knew they'd come for me to get to you, she said. It wasn't a question. It's what I would have done, Samuel replied. Target the people someone cares about when you can't reach them directly. Meera's hands paused in their work. Is that what happened in Iraq, with Maynard? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. We were sent to extract a high-value intelligence asset, a scientist who wanted to defect. Routine mission, except nothing about it felt right from the beginning. Wrong time frame, inadequate intelligence, unusual chain of command. Maynard. Set you up? He was following orders too, I suspect. But he knew what he was doing. Samuel's eyes took on that faraway look she'd come to recognize. We lost 3 men in the initial ambush. Would have lost everyone if not for a contingency. Extraction I arranged against protocol. And when you reported it, they buried it. Classified the whole operation. Threatened courts-martial if we pushed. The bitterness in his voice was old but undiminished. Maynard got promoted. The rest of us got silence. Darren, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the light. And 30 years later, he's still trying to keep that silence. Samuel nodded. Some secrets don't stay buried. As dawn broke over the mountains, news of the night's event spread through the small town like wildfire. Local news vans parked outside the sheriff's office, where Chase and his accomplices were being processed on multiple felony charges. Renee published her initial findings alongside the surveillance footage, and within hours, national media outlets picked up the story, Legendary sniper stops hate crime at small-town gun range. The internet exploded with Samuel's military history, declassified records, and accounts from former soldiers whose lives he had saved. Hashtags trended: The Phantom Marksman, Justice for Hawk, Thank you for your service. By mid-morning, Chase and his friends had been released on bail, met outside the station by a grim-faced Sheriff Maynard who hustled them into his personal vehicle amidst a barrage of reporters' questions. 3 days after the confrontation at the range, Samuel sat in Meera's apartment, watching a national news broadcast covering the incident. The anchor, a polished woman with perfect hair, spoke with practiced gravity about revelations of systemic racism and the heroic actions of a forgotten military legend. Samuel switched off the television with a grimace. "They're missing the point," he said. "This was never about heroism." Meera, preparing coffee in the kitchen, glanced over at him. "What was it about then?" "Accountability," Samuel replied. "The past doesn't go away just because you want it to." The media storm had transformed their quiet town into the epicenter of a national conversation about racism, military cover-ups, and the treatment of veterans. Samuel's phone rang constantly with interview requests, which he consistently declined. Renee, however, embraced the spotlight, using it to shine a light on the deeper story. Her investigation had expanded beyond the local incident to the military operation in Iraq that connected Samuel and Maynard. With each new article, more pressure mounted on the Department of Defense to unseal records from the mission. That afternoon, a black SUV with government plates parked outside Samuel's modest home. 2 men in crisp suits emerged, one carrying a leather portfolio stamped with official insignia. "Mr. Hawkins," the taller man greeted when Samuel opened the door. "I'm Special Agent Thomas from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. We'd like to speak with you about Operation Sandviper." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but a slight tension in his shoulders betrayed his surprise at hearing the operation's codename after so many years. 30 years late, he observed. "But come in." Inside, the agents laid out documents on Samuel's kitchen table, many still bearing classified stamps that had been freshly crossed out with declassified markers. In light of recent events and media scrutiny, the Secretary has authorized a full review of the 1991 incident, Agent Thomas explained. "We're reopening the investigation into the compromised extraction." Samuel studied the documents without touching them. "Why now?" "Officially, new evidence has emerged." The agent's expression suggested there was more to it. "Unofficially, no. One wants to be on the wrong side of this story. The optics are problematic." "Optics," Samuel repeated, the word bitter in his mouth. 3 good men died, my entire team was nearly wiped out, and now, after 30 years, someone's worried about optics? The second agent, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. "Mr. Hawkins, we understand your frustration, but this is an opportunity to set the record straight. Sheriff Maynard and several others connected to the operation are being investigated for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and potentially treason." Samuel's gaze sharpened. "Treason? The scientist you were sent to extract? He wasn't defecting. He was being silenced. He had evidence of illegal weapon sales to the very forces we were fighting." The pieces that had never quite fit suddenly aligned in Samuel's mind. "Who authorized the operation?" The agent slid across a document with a name that made Samuel's blood run cold. A high-ranking official who had gone on to become a powerful defense contractor. "We'll need your official testimony," Agent Thomas said. "As the ranking officer on ground during the extraction, your account is crucial." Samuel stared at the document spread before him, the physical manifestation of secrets that had haunted him for decades. "I'll testify," he said finally, "but not for your investigation, for my men who never came home." Later that evening, Samuel met with Darren and Meera at the range, which had been closed to the public since the incident. The building had become something of a pilgrimage site, with people leaving flowers and thank-you notes at the entrance. "The Department of Defense is reopening the Iraq case," Samuel told them. "They want my testimony." Darren whistled low. That's going to cause some serious waves. It already has, Samuel replied. Maynard's been suspended pending investigation. Chase and his friends are facing federal hate crime charges on top of the assault and conspiracy counts. Meera studied Samuel's face. You don't seem happy about it. Justice delayed isn't really justice, he said quietly. It's just less injustice. A knock at the door interrupted them. Renee entered, looking both excited and apprehensive. My publisher called, she announced. They want to fast-track the book now. Full marketing push, speaking tour, the works. Congratulations, Samuel said, genuinely pleased for her. Renee hesitated. There's a condition. They want you involved. Front and center. Samuel shook his head. I'm not interested in being a celebrity. Not as a celebrity, Renee countered. As a voice for others. Black veterans whose stories were erased. Men and women who served in silence and came home to a country that didn't acknowledge their sacrifice. The words hung in the air, their weight and truth undeniable. Samuel's expression remained stoic, but something shifted in his eyes. I'll consider it, he finally said. On one condition. The proceeds go to supporting injured black veterans and underfunded schools in communities like the one I grew up in. Renee grinned. Already put it in the contract draft. 2 weeks later, Samuel stood uncomfortably in a pressed uniform that had been tailored to fit his now leaner frame. The ceremony at the National Mall had drawn hundreds of spectators and a full media contingent. On stage, a 4-star general prepared to present Samuel with the Distinguished Service Cross that had been denied him decades earlier. The citation read like fiction. Impossible shots taken under unimaginable conditions. Dozens of American lives saved through his precision and courage. When it came time for Samuel to speak, he approached the microphone with the same measured pace that characterized all his movements. I accept this honor, he began, his voice steady but soft, forcing the crowd to quiet themselves to hear him. Not for myself, but on behalf of all those who were never thanked. The men and women who served in shadows, whose names don't appear in history books, whose sacrifices weren't caught on camera. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Samuel spoke not of his own achievements, but of the collective debt owed to those who had given everything for a country that often gave little in return. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Darren approached Samuel, hand extended. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just for what you did back then, but for now. For standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Samuel clasped his hand, firmly. Your father would be proud of you, Darren. You're not him. You're better. But make sure your son knows your story ends differently than his did. Meera joined them, having pinned the medal on Samuel's chest during the ceremony. The range reopens tomorrow, she said. We've had calls from all over the country, veterans, shooting clubs, even a youth program from the inner city. Samuel smiled slightly. Good. A range should be about skill and discipline, not where you come from or what you look like. As they walked toward the cars, Renee hurried over, phone in hand. That was my publisher, she said breathlessly. They're doubling the initial print run. The pre-orders are through the roof. Just make sure you get the story right, Samuel told her. Not just the shots fired, but why they mattered. That evening, Samuel visited Calvin at his mountain cabin, bringing a bottle of good bourbon and news of the ceremony. Should have seen it, Cal, he said as they sat on the porch. Brass everywhere, cameras, speeches. Would have hated every minute of it. Calvin laughed, pouring drinks by feel. Bet you did too. Every second, Samuel admitted with a rare chuckle. They drank in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the forest. So what now? Calvin finally asked. You've got your recognition. The bad guys are facing justice. Pretty reporters making you famous. Riding off into the sunset. Samuel considered the question, watching the bourbon catch the light as he swirled it in his glass. I think I'm done saving the world, he said at last. Time to focus on the small piece of it I can actually make better. Back in town, tensions remained high despite the positive developments. A group of local residents had organized a protest, demanding Sheriff Maynard's permanent removal, while others defended him as a victim of political correctness gone mad. The range had become symbolic in ways neither Samuel nor Darren had intended, a battleground in a larger cultural war. But amidst the controversy, something unexpected was happening. New faces were appearing at the range: Black, Latino, Asian, people who had never felt welcome before. Meera observed this shift with cautious optimism. "It's a start," she told her father as they prepared to reopen. "Not a solution, but a start." Unnoticed by the McKnights, a man in a tailored suit watched the range from a parked car across the street. He spoke quietly into a secure phone. "He's settled back into civilian life," the man reported. "But the skill set is still there. Reaction time slightly diminished, but judgment and precision actually improved." He listened to instructions from the other end, then nodded. "Understood. We'll wait for now, but keep the file active. He may have one more mission in him yet." As dusk fell across the town, Samuel stood at his kitchen window, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. For the first time in decades, he felt something like peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of purpose. The old ghosts weren't gone, but perhaps finally they were beginning to rest. 3 months after the confrontation at the range, a fragile normalcy had settled over the town. Samuel had retreated back into his quiet routine, his brief moment of fame fading as media attention shifted elsewhere. The range flourished under Darren and Meera's management, becoming a model of inclusion in a community still wrestling with its divisions. Sheriff Maynard had been placed on administrative leave pending the federal investigation, his authority temporarily transferred to his deputy. Chase and his friends awaited trial on reduced charges, their family's influence having secured favorable bail conditions. It was a cool autumn morning when Meera didn't show up for her opening shift at the range. Darren called her cell phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring increasing his concern. By noon, he'd contacted every friend and acquaintance who might know her whereabouts. When he finally called Samuel, his voice was tight with barely controlled panic. "She never came home last night. Her car's gone. Phone goes straight to voicemail." Samuel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, already moving toward his rifle case. He arrived to find Darren pacing the range office, phone pressed to his ear. "Still nothing," Darren reported, ending the call. "I've filed a missing persons report, but without evidence of foul play." "There's foul play," Samuel said with quiet certainty. He handed Darren a folded piece of paper that had been left under his truck's windshield wiper. "Found this when I was leaving." Darren unfolded it with shaking hands, written in block letters, "You took our boys. Now we take yours." "Maynard," Darren breathed, his face darkening with rage. "Not directly," Samuel cautioned. "He's too visible right now. But he has connections, people who owe him favors, who share his grudges. What do we do?" Samuel's expression hardened into something ancient and dangerous. "I need to go see Calvin." By late afternoon, Samuel had returned to his small house to prepare. The living room had been transformed, furniture pushed aside, maps spread across tables, and his rifle case open on the floor. From a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard, Samuel retrieved a worn footlocker he hadn't opened in years. Inside lay remnants of another life, a set of faded camouflage utilities, specialized equipment, and a small, weathered Bible. He dressed, methodically, his movements betraying none of the urgency he felt. Each item was checked and positioned with the precision of ritual. Finally, he knelt beside the case, eyes closed, lips moving in a silent prayer. "Tell her I had to go be a soldier one last time," he had told Calvin earlier that day. Now, alone, in the gathering dusk, those words echoed in his mind as both promise and lament. Meanwhile, Renee Jackson had been conducting her own investigation into Meera's disappearance. Her journalist's instincts and connections had led her to an unsettling discovery: a property listing for an abandoned military training facility on the outskirts of the county, recently leased by a shell company with ties to private military contractors. "It's isolated, secure, and off most official maps," she explained to Darren over a secure line. Exactly the kind of place you'd take someone you didn't want found. I'm calling the FBI, Darren said immediately. Already tried, Renee replied. They need more evidence to move, especially with the political sensitivities around Maynard's case, by the time they cut through the red tape. The implication hung heavily between them. I need to tell Samuel, Darren said. Already did, Renee admitted. He's making preparations. As night fell, Samuel moved silently through the woods surrounding the abandoned training facility. Age and old injuries had taken their toll, but decades of discipline and experience compensated for what time had stolen. He traversed the difficult terrain with deliberate care, avoiding the obvious approaches that would certainly be monitored. Through his thermal scope, he counted 6 men patrolling the perimeter. Professional mercenaries by their movement patterns, not local thugs. They carried military-grade weapons and communicated with tactical headsets. This was no amateur operation. Samuel settled into a natural depression overlooking the main building, establishing a sniper's hide with practiced efficiency. Years melted away as muscle memory took over, his breathing automatically synchronizing with his heartbeat. The first guard went down silently, a well-placed tranquilizer dart finding its mark at the base of his neck. Samuel had made his choice. This would not be a killing mission. The second and third guards followed in similar fashion, each collapsing without raising an alarm. Inside the facility, Meera worked methodically at the zip ties binding her wrists to a metal chair. Hours of patient friction against a rough edge of the seat had frayed the plastic, but not enough to break free. Her captors had been professional, but not brutal. No gratuitous violence, just efficient detainment. The leader, a hard-faced man with a prosthetic hand, had made their purpose clear. You're just leverage, he had explained dispassionately. Nothing personal. Once the old man shows up, you go free. He won't come alone, Meera had warned. And he's not what you think. The man had smiled thinly. We're counting on it. Now, as she worked at her restraints, Meera heard the first signs of something changing. A guard's radio call going unanswered. Footsteps hurrying past her door. Terse orders being issued. He's here, she whispered to herself, doubling her efforts on the zip ties. Samuel had infiltrated the building through a maintenance access point, disabling 2 more guards along the way. The facility's layout was familiar, standard military design that he had navigated countless times in different contexts. He moved like a shadow, using darkness and silence as weapons. When he reached the corridor where Meera was being held, he encountered the first real resistance. 2 guards with tactical positioning and clear fields of fire made a direct approach impossible. Samuel retreated briefly, finding the building's electrical panel. With precise timing, he triggered a targeted blackout of just that section, plunging the corridor into darkness. In the momentary confusion, he moved. The guards never saw him coming. One moment they were adjusting to the darkness, the next, they were unconscious on the floor, victims of Samuel's silent efficiency. Outside the door where Meera was held, Samuel paused, listening. One person inside, breathing patterns suggesting readiness, not relaxation. The leader. Instead of bursting in, Samuel knocked gently. She's coming out, he called, his voice casual. Boss wants her moved. A moment of silence, then footsteps approaching the door. As it opened, Samuel struck with the speed and precision that had made him legendary, a single blow to a specific nerve cluster that dropped the man instantly. Meera looked up in shock as Samuel entered, his familiar face a stark contrast to the tactical gear and focused intensity of his bearing. Took you long enough, she said, managing a small smile despite her situation. Had to let them make their last mistake, Samuel replied, producing a knife to cut her restraints. Once freed, Meera immediately moved to a defensive position, years of military training taking over. How many? 6 outside, 4 inside. All neutralized, non-lethally. She nodded her approval. Exit strategy? Samuel handed her a backup weapon. Northwest corner, through the maintenance tunnel. Renee is waiting with a vehicle a half-mile out. As they prepared to move, the leader began to stir. Samuel knelt beside him, applying just enough pressure to keep him immobilized. Who hired you? He asked quietly. The man's eyes darted away. Job came through usual channels, private contract. Maynard? A hesitation, then a slight nod. Indirectly, through an intermediary. Samuel studied him for a moment. You have a choice now. This can end here, or it can follow you for the rest of your life. Your call. Something in Samuel's tone, not a threat, but absolute certainty, reached through the man's professional detachment. There's a laptop in the office, he said finally. Contract details, payment trail, everything. Password is Sierra Echo, Victor Echo, November. Samuel committed it to memory, with a nod. Make better choices next time, he advised, before rendering the man unconscious again with a precise strike. As they made their way through the darkened facility, Meera touched Samuel's arm. How did you find me so quickly? Samuel's expression softened briefly. I've been tracking high-value targets across hostile territory for longer than you've been alive. Finding someone I care about? That's just coming home. They retrieved the laptop and continued toward the exit point. As they neared the tunnel entrance, headlights swept across the compound. Multiple vehicles approaching rapidly. Reinforcements, Samuel assessed grimly. Change of plan. He guided Meera to a defensive position with good cover and clear sight lines. I'll draw them off. You get to the extraction point. I'm not leaving you, she protested. Not asking, Samuel replied firmly. This isn't your fight. Meera's eyes flashed. It became my fight when they took me to get to you. We go together or not at all. For a brief moment, Samuel saw not just Meera, but echoes of her grandfather. The same stubborn courage, the same loyalty. He nodded once, adjusting his plan. Together then. As the vehicles disgorged armed men, a single shot rang out, taking out the lead vehicle's engine block in a spray of steam and oil. The precision and angle of the shot sent a clear message. A master sniper had them in his sights. Confusion erupted as the men scrambled for cover, uncertain where the shot had come from. Another shot disabled a second vehicle, boxing them in, without harming any personnel. Through their confusion came another vehicle, a sheriff's department cruiser with emergency lights flashing. Deputy Patterson emerged, weapon drawn. Federal agents inbound, he announced through a loudspeaker. Lay down your weapons. This facility is surrounded. It was a bluff, but a well-timed one. Between Samuel's precise shots, Patterson's authoritative presence, and the genuine uncertainty of their situation, the mercenaries made the practical choice. Weapons were lowered, hands raised. From their hidden position, Samuel and Meera watched the surrender unfold. Your friend has good timing, Samuel observed. I called him when they first grabbed me, Meera explained. Managed to hit emergency dial before they took my phone. Wasn't sure if it connected. Samuel allowed himself a small smile. Always have a backup plan. As they finally made their way to Renee's waiting vehicle, Samuel glanced back at the facility, now swarming with local law enforcement. A chapter was ending, but the story wasn't over yet. One last shot, he murmured to himself. 1 year later, the Hawkins training grounds celebrated its grand opening. The former McKnight shooting range had been completely renovated and expanded, its new mission proclaimed on a bronze plaque by the entrance. Where skill and respect meet, all are welcome. Meera, now the head instructor and co-owner with her father, cut the ceremonial ribbon before a crowd of community members, veterans, and media. The facility had been transformed into both a premier shooting range and a community center offering programs for at-risk youth, veterans with PTSD, and anyone seeking to learn responsible firearms handling. My grandfather believed that the ability to protect others was a sacred trust, Meera told the gathered crowd. Today, we honor that belief by creating a space where everyone can learn, practice, and grow, regardless of background, race, or circumstance. Samuel watched from the sidelines, uncomfortable with attention but proud of what had been accomplished. The events of the previous year had led to significant changes. Sheriff Maynard had been indicted on multiple federal charges, his decades of corruption finally exposed through evidence found on the mercenary leader's laptop. Chase and his friends had received reduced sentences in exchange for testimony against the larger conspiracy, their youth and manipulation by older figures taken into account during sentencing. They were now serving community service hours at veteran support centers, a more productive form of justice than mere punishment. Renee's book, The Phantom Sniper, The Story They Buried, had spent 20 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. As promised, all proceeds went to supporting Black veterans and underfunded schools. More importantly, it had sparked a congressional investigation into the systematic erasure of Black service members' contributions from official military histories. After the ceremony, Darren approached Samuel with a handshake that turned into an embrace. "Couldn't have done this without you," he said, gesturing to the transformed facility. "You would have found a way," Samuel replied. "You're stubborn like that." Darren chuckled. "Learned from the best. I'm teaching a veteran support group now, helping them process what they brought home with them." "Good," Samuel nodded approvingly. "That's a different kind of marksmanship, hitting the target that really matters." As the crowd dispersed into the new facility for tours and demonstrations, Samuel slipped away quietly. He had found a small lake house 30 miles outside of town, close enough to visit, far enough for the solitude he still craved. His days now had a gentle rhythm, fishing in the early mornings, reading through the key in afternoon, occasionally mentoring a promising young shooter Meera sent his way. The nightmares that had plagued him for decades had not disappeared entirely, but they came less frequently now, with less power to disturb his peace. One crisp autumn day, Calvin came to visit, guided by a new service dog named Scout. They sat on Samuel's dock, fishing lines cast into the still water. "You ever think your story would end like this?" Calvin asked, his face turned toward the warmth of the sun. Samuel considered the question, watching a pair of ospreys circle overhead. "It hasn't ended," he said finally. "Just changed chapters." Calvin nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough. Better. Chapter, though. Much better," Samuel agreed. Their peaceful reflection was interrupted by the sound of tires on gravel. A government-issue black SUV pulled up to the cabin, and a familiar figure emerged. Agent Thomas from the Department of Defense. "Mr. Hawkins," he called, approaching the dock with a leather portfolio similar to the one he'd brought during their first meeting. "Sorry to disturb you." Samuel sighed, recognizing the look in the agent's eyes. "What is it this time?" "Information has surfaced about an operation you were involved in during the Gulf War, an extraction that went wrong." The agent held out a file marked classified in bold red letters. "We need your expertise." Samuel looked at the file, then back at the placid lake surface. Without a word, he gently pushed the agent's hand away. "I've had enough of killing," he said simply. "Find someone else." Agent Thomas hesitated. "This isn't about killing, Mr. Hawkins. It's about finding the truth. About justice delayed." "Justice delayed is still justice denied," Samuel replied. "I've given enough to causes that weren't worth the cost. My answer is no." The agent seemed ready to argue further, but something in Samuel's expression, not anger, but absolute finality, made him reconsider. With a respectful nod, he returned to his vehicle and drove away. Calvin, who had listened to the exchange in silence, smiled slightly. "Turning down the call to adventure? That's not the Samuel Hawkins I knew." "Maybe you never really knew me," Samuel replied with unexpected lightness. "Or maybe I finally know myself." Several weeks later, Samuel attended a special ceremony at the training grounds. Meera was receiving a national medal for bravery related to the events of the previous year. The facility was packed with dignitaries, media, and community members. When Meera took the podium to give her acceptance speech, her eyes found Samuel in the crowd. "People have called me brave for what happened last year," she began. "But true courage isn't found in dramatic moments. It's found in showing up day after day to face whatever comes with dignity and purpose." She paused, emotion briefly overtaking her professional composure. "Everything I am, I owe to a man who never asked for thanks, who taught me that precision isn't just about hitting targets, but about choosing the right targets to hit in the first place." Samuel ducked his head slightly, uncomfortable with the recognition but moved by her words. After the ceremony, Samuel walked the grounds alone, noting the changes with approval. The walls now featured photographs of diverse American heroes throughout military history, many of them black service members whose contributions had been overlooked. Training programs catered to everyone from competitive shooters to complete beginners, with special classes for women, minorities, and veterans. On one wall, Samuel's philosophy had been engraved in bronze: shoot not to harm but to protect, speak not to boast but to teach. As the sun began to set, Samuel found himself drawn to the far end of the range. The last few visitors were leaving, and in the growing quiet, he felt a familiar urge. Setting up at the farthest lane, he removed his old rifle from its case, the movements as natural as breathing. He loaded a single round and adjusted the scope, his hands steady and sure. At the maximum distance, a glass bottle had been placed on a stand, a nearly impossible shot for most, at the very edge of practical marksmanship. Samuel settled into position, finding that perfect stillness that had defined his life for so long. He breathed out slowly, squeezing the trigger at precisely the right moment. The bottle shattered, a clean hit at 1,000 yards. A small smile touched Samuel's lips as the sound of the shot echoed and faded, blending with the wind rustling through the trees. He carefully packed away his rifle, knowing it might be the last time he fired it. Some skills never fade, he thought, but some battles end not with victory or defeat, but with the choice to set down your weapon and walk away. As he left the range, a young black girl, no more than 12, watched him with wide, curious eyes. She wore a worn baseball cap similar to his own, and her stance suggested someone already learning to find her center. "Are you him?" she asked boldly. "The sniper they all talk about?" Samuel considered her for a moment, then knelt to meet her, at eye level. "I'm just an old soldier," he said gently, "but I see a future marksman standing right in front of me." He adjusted her cap slightly, the gesture carrying all the weight of passing something precious forward. "Remember," he told her, "the most important shot is always the next one. Make it count." The girl nodded solemnly, understanding something, beyond her years in his words. As Samuel walked toward his truck, the setting sun cast his shadow long across the ground. Not the shadow of a weapon, but of a man who had finally found his peace. The range stood as his legacy, a place where barriers fell and skill alone determined worth, and somewhere in the distance the echo of his last shot continued to ripple outward, touching lives he would never know in ways he could never imagine. The story of the phantom marksman wasn't ending. It was just beginning to be properly told. Have you ever wondered how many legends walk among us, unrecognized until someone pushes them too far? If Samuel's story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of hidden heroes who remind us that respect is earned, not demanded.